Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Two Friends Film Podcast. My name is Brian, and as always, I'm here with Fowler. Say hello.
I am here, and I am glad that I have introduced my good friend Brian to the work of Guillermo del Toro through his best film,
That is true.
inarguably.
I have never seen a Guillermo del Toro film up to this point, seems like a cardinal sin on me as a film person. But we are here to watch the first one I have seen, which is The Shape of Water. As always, we start with a summary here. To get into it, The Shape of Water stars Sally Hawkins as Elise, um, and
Elisa.
then Elisa, and then we have Michael Shannon as Stickland, and then Richard Jenkins is Giles. Doug Jones is the reptilian or amphibious man,
Let's just call him the Fish Man,
the
so that
fish
it's
man,
consistent. Yeah.
whatever, yeah. And then uh, we have a couple other side characters as well, and we'll go over those too. Um, but yeah, so overall, the plot of this movie revolves around Sally Hawkins' character, essentially being mute help in this military facility in the 1960s in Baltimore.
She's a
And
janitor,
she's a
to be clear.
janitor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she is helping, like, in the facility, clean things with Octavia Spencer's character as well, who's named Zelda. And they are,
Zelda is, just to be clear, Zelda is black, because these minority sort of identities will come in, they'll be more important later on in the story.
yeah. So essentially, they come across at one point this fish man uh, in the story, and Sally Hawkins' character falls in love with said fish man. And it sort of progresses their relationship with it, as well as having Giles, who is sort of like a friend and a roommate to her throughout the
And a
course
gay
of the
man.
story, and a gay man.
Yeah.
So it's the overall story isn't too complex. It's not something like we've dealt with in terms of complexity, like Eternal Sunshine in the past. But it's a pretty straightforward romance monster movie type story, with a lot of beautiful cinematography, beautiful acting, and just amazing set pieces. Um,
Yeah, I'd agree. I would just want to say, just to outline the plot,
mhm.
um, the fish man was captured by Strickland, who's the antagonist of the story and a military operative. He took the creature from South America, and the American military, they think its ability to breathe in air and water will mean it's the perfect test subject to basically beat the Russians at a space race. It's essentially like a proto astronaut.
Yeah,
And then, like Brian was saying, Elisa falls in love with the fishman, and she, Giles, and Zelda basically attempt to um, free it from the facility before it's dissected by Strickland. They're helped by Dmitri. Dmitri is a scientist at the military base, but he's a secret Russian agent, and Dmitri essentially helps them get it to escape. Um, Strickland's entire career is based on his ability to bring the fish man to bring the fish man to the base, to kill it, and then to basically give its remains to his superiors in the military. When Strickland loses the creature, he essentially goes mad, and he does absolutely everything to get it back. And while this is happening, Elisa and the fishman fall in love, and they end up having consensual intercourse. Strickland goes on essentially a murder spree. He tortures and then kills Dimitri to figure out who else helped the fishman escape. Then he goes to Zelda's home, and he basically threatens to kill her and her family if she doesn't give him up. Her husband ends up giving up Elisa, but she stays firm. Then he goes to Elisa's place. She's attempting to free the fishman in the canal in Baltimore in order to let it swim to the ocean. Um, Strickland arrives right before they release the creature. He attacks and badly injures Giles. Then he shoots both the fish man and Eliza, who are both mortally wounded. But the fish man, its regenerative powers allows it to live. It kills Strickland, and then it takes Eliza's body into the water, and it essentially heals her and helps give her gills. So that's kind of the rough outline of the story.
Yeah, and again, it's not it's pretty straightforward in terms of it. So I guess to start off, so the strengths and weaknesses, there's to in terms of the strengths, there's a lot to talk about. It's hard to find a weakness in a film like this because it's just so it's almost flawless. I will say so to start off with the strengths though. I will
Mm-hmm.
say the things I really enjoyed about it was from a technical perspective. Some of those shots and sequences were amazing. Like the sequence that stands out to me a lot is the opening of the scene where it's basically all filmed underwater and then transitions into Sally Hawkins or Elisa's apartment. Um,
A lot of the water shots, because water is a huge. We'll talk about this in themes. It's a huge element of the story.
yeah,
Are really beautifully filmed. A lot of the sex scenes are in the water. A lot of the dream sequences are in water, and even the interplay of like the water running across the train windows or the rain. I mean, it's just gorgeous.
yeah, and like cinematography wise, it's like a fascinating film to watch and look at. Another,
It's incredibly visually stunning.
yeah,
It's color coordinated. There are very specific colors that pop up all the time, but like there's also just all these little details. Del Toro is a master of details. The television going in the background of all the musicals and the films, the television, how cozy and lived in Giles' study and Elisa's room and bathroom look. It's just a really beautiful film, and because Eliza is deaf and the fishman can't talk,
well, she's not.
nonverbal world building
To
is
be fair, she's not deaf. She's mute. Like,
sorry, mute,
the,
yeah. um Nonverbal world building is essential in this film because the two main leads can't talk, and so much of this film has to be through body language and the expressiveness of their faces and verbal cues around the story. And it's, I think you would agree, Brian, it does so masterfully. There's no confusion watching this film, and you really feel this film in like an incredibly potent way. And
yeah,
the
and
world
what's
is so immersive and real feeling.
it's also a testament to like Doug Jones as an actor as well, who plays the fishman in this film, is that he's very expressive with his body and like to be able to do that as an actor is so underrated because like a lot of times you think of acting as the sort of visual or verbal sort of component of it, right? How we
Yeah.
say our words, how our words translate to the screen, things like that. But I think what truly differentiates like a really good actor and a really great actor is understanding that the camera is also an element in that performance, right? Like playing to the camera and playing your body to the camera is a very important thing to give off a performance. There are multiple times where you can see this sort of this pensiveness, um, this sort of curiosity in this creature, learning as you know, learning with these characters as they go along. Um, it's quite an interesting sort of thing to watch. I mean, as an audience member, right?
I would also say another thing I really like about Doug Jones' performance is at the beginning of the film, when you don't understand the fishman particularly well, like he moves in ways that are somewhat erotic and mesmerizing and beautiful, but it's also foreign and it's dangerous. And then as the story goes on and you know the fishman better, he's able to sort of shift in his movements and the way that he moves his head and his eyes and his body. It
Mm,
becomes more and more humanoid. And like just kind of emotional. And then the opposite happens of Strickland. Strickland starts off as kind of he and Giles are the only two kind of main cast members who really talk at all.
Mm.
But Strickland starts off as almost this like archetype of a protagonist in a horror film. And then, as Doug Jones shifts and becomes more and more human in the way that he moves, Strickland does the opposite. He becomes much more jerky. He becomes much more feral and bestial. It's a fascinating transformation. And I think that's something Del Toro is really good at, is being able to find humanity in very different people who you have trouble identifying with, and also find the monstrousness and the alienness of people that you normally can't identify with.
Yeah, it's one of those films where I think there are a couple filmmakers I feel like they kind of put something together, it's there, it's good, it's serviceable, but I feel like with Del Toro, at least from this first film I've seen, it seems like he's a master of understanding what he's trying to say in this film. Like what he's trying to convey. There's no mistakes in terms of acting or cadence or things like that. Um, I will say, like, there are, for a film like this though, um, it's also like paced very well. Like, as we're going along, we were kind of dabbling at the script or like looking at the former, cut of the script, and the script is much much longer than the actual movie turned out to be, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually think that helped a lot because, like, I think a lot of the things that were added into the script seem to be kind of would have made it over bloated. But pacing wise, like, you're talking about a film that like does not drag really.
I agree. There's some parts I think are weaker, but overall I would agree. I think one of the things about The Shape of Water that's interesting is a lot of the films that we've covered, because we're trying to pick films that have a lot to say or a lot to talk about. Like Rashomon is a good example. Network,
Mm-hmm.
they're very complicated, and there's a dozen films, and they're all pulling in different directions. And I think Del Toro is a master not only of visuals. I think he's really unmatched besides like the Coen Brothers and Kubrick, but simplicity. There's only basically four themes in the film. They're massively tied to certain colors or certain elements, and um, if you really dig down, the film is incredibly simple and almost bare bones. Like everything that's in the film is there very deliberately for a reason, and it's not overly complicated. It's a very intuitive film. You watch it and you understand it, and you don't really need to watch it a second time. Although I love this film.
Yeah, no. When you originally pitched this film to me, I felt like it was going to be really weird. Like, I knew Del Toro was a great director. I haven't seen any of his stuff before this, but I thought it was just going to be a weird sort of romance thing. And now I understand why you love it so much.
Mm-hmm.
But to move on to the weaknesses, the one
I
thing.
just want to say two more strengths.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
The acting is amazing. I think this is the best acting of anything we've seen so far. I mean, Eliza, like her role of being a deaf woman who has to be the protagonist and
or
carry the
Mute
story,
Woman. I'm sorry.
mute woman, she's unbelievable. She's so emotional. You feel what she's feeling. She can carry the story. Giles is also an extraordinarily good actor. He's the main talker out of the main cast, and he kills it. He's so nuanced and multi-layered. Doug Jones as the Fishman is great. Like, even the roles that are like not given enough time, like Zelda and Dimitri, or like Strickland, where you know uh, Michael Shannon has a lot less to work with. Like they're not bad; they're very good. But I would just say like the acting of those main three, it's like unbelievably good, and the
But
film would not work without them being such good actors.
but it's also like some performances kind of like, and that's to go on to like at least one of the gripes I have is it the performances pale a little bit in comparison to your main three there.
Yeah, I
Um,
would agree.
but like that's also, they're not given the same screen time and presence, so it's harder to do a lot with a lot less.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is this is a really powerful. We're talking about Conan and how Conan's like almost a meta analysis of like the action adventure medieval story. The Shape of Water is like that on steroids. It's a masterclass of like it takes the conventional horror story and it completely changes everything while keeping all the characters. Just the context is different.
Yeah.
Like the racially coded monster that's usually the villain and is usually after the white woman to like rape them and then kill them. He's the love interest of the story, and he's this powerful transformative force of love and healing. All the main characters like queer people, disabled people, African Americans, the only literally a Russian agent during the Cold War. These are characters that are not part of that genre, but Del Toro has made them protagonists, and they don't win through the masculine over violence of that genre. They win through kind of stereotypically feminine values and strategies like kindness and teamwork and togetherness. And then, of course, the dashing, strong white military man who's normally the hero of these stories and he kills the monster. He is the monster of the story. He's, I think, arguably one of the most terrifying characters in the entirety of the horror genre. He's horrifying, especially at the end when he completely mentally unravels. And I think this is a great example of how you don't need to reinvent the wheel to make a good film. Your film can be extremely conventional from a plot perspective and a character perspective, and yet it can be powerful and almost immortal.
Yeah, I will say him literally when Dimitri gets shot in the face and him literally taking his finger and hooking it into his mouth to drag him was the most viscerally violent thing I think I've seen in a fucking romance film, you know?
Yeah, I don't think Michael Shannon as Strickland, I don't think he necessarily like pops compared to the others, but in the scenes where he's supposed to be rapey or intimidating or terrifying or unstable, he kills it. He's so unnerving on screen when we'll talk about this later during characters, his mask slips and you really see what kind of human being he actually is.
So I guess yeah, like overall there aren't a lot of weaknesses to talk about. That one thing about acting in terms of the smaller roles being diminished. That's the only thing. Do you have any other weaknesses you could think of before we move on to characters?
Well, we can talk about this with questions, but I'm curious how making Strickland more sympathetic in the beginning, middle part of the film before he goes full psycho, whether that would have made the story better. We'll
We
have to
can
talk about
actually
that.
talk about that in questions as well. I have some thoughts, but I'm kind of we can discuss it further there.
Okay. I would say Zelda just doesn't have enough screen time. Maybe she did originally, but
Hmm.
she just doesn't pop like the other characters. She doesn't have as much to work with.
Yeah.
Um, she's mainly a plot device.
Mm.
Um, I would say Dimitri, I thought was quite interesting. I think if they removed some of the things of him dealing with the handlers and they gave him more of an emotional journey, I think that could have been really powerful.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say pacing wise, the first half of the film is really, really good.
Mm.
The escape is like incredibly nerve wracking and satisfying
Yeah.
of the fishman from the facility. And then Strickland's murder spree at the end of the story is some of the most tense fight alleys I've ever seen in a film. I would say that I think it slows down a little bit and not necessarily in a good way, kind of between Strickland going mad and like the day after the escape. I feel like that was kind of a slow part of the film. I think they're
But
trying to do it to strengthen the romance, but like I think they needed to have more things pop in that thing, you
I
know.
actually tend to disagree with you on that. I think that was a good break. I think it was kind of necessary to have that because I think with romance, what you really want to do is you want to have those slow burns, right? To have like a truly good romance. And I think those times where you see the romantic interactions between the two romantic leads there needed that sort of slow burn.
I agree it couldn't bang the entire way, but like I think it could have been a stronger part of the film if they contrasted Eliza and the fishman falling in love with the cat and mouse game that Strickland and Dimitri were playing, where they were both suspecting each other. Like I think that would have been a stronger kind of film, and it would have made Strickland killing Dimitri more emotionally satisfying, at least for me.
Okay, I could see that perspective. I just think for me, what really worked for it was just that, you need those sort of breaks in a film. I don't think there are many films where it's get up and go all the time where you can just have those sort of, I guess, moments, especially in the genre that is romance. Um, but to move on to characters, uh,
Mm-hmm.
So this week I'm curious, because you sent me over a list of like the characters in the order you want to talk about them. It's not based on conformity again, I would have to guess, because we're not watching the fucking Breakfast Club again. But give the audience a little taste of like why you ordered the characters in the way you did this week.
Yeah, so I wanted the first characters to be the main protagonists just because I think they interconnect. And so talking about them together makes sense because they move each other as characters throughout the story. And then um, I wanted the Fishman to be last because the Fishman is more of a symbol than he is kind of a traditional character. And I think he kind of embodies one of the themes that I want to jump into. And then second to last of the Fishman, I wanted Strickland because there's a lot to say about him as a character because he goes through like most characters go through evolutions. He goes through a devolution that is like I think incomparable to anything besides like It's Always Sunny, but in like an hour and a half film instead of 6 seasons.
Yeah, instead of like 16 seasons of people just devolving, in 2 hours he just turns into a feral beast.
He does. He's completely unhinged by the end. He's just like an animal, like,
Oh,
it's an interesting thing because a lot of this film is about like the power of love, but like around the time he pops into Zelda's house unannounced, you're like, he needs to be put down for the safety of society.
yeah, like there's a scene specifically in that Zelda confrontation, and I know you're gonna get to it, but Jesus Christ, dude, I can't unsee that shit.
Yeah, no. Okay, so Elise is the main character.
Mm.
She's a mute woman who works as a janitor at the military base, and she was found when she was a baby in the river in Putnam with scars on her neck. And she lives a quite isolated life. Her two friends are Zelda, her colleague, the black woman, and Giles, who's basically like her roommate character. And Eliza, again, I think she's the best acted character in the film. She doesn't talk. She uses sign language, but like mainly it's her facial expressions and her body movements. And she's such a powerful character. And I think sometimes with minority characters, there's sort of like making them angels, where they're just these pure beings of innocence. And I think Angel from what's the one about the Broadway show about the people who are all dying of AIDS during the 80s?
Oh, God.
Rent.
I,
Yeah.
Rent. Oh, fuck, yeah, yeah.
Angel falls into that archetype, and a lot of characters do. I like the fact that she isn't.
Mhm.
Like, you meet her and she's a very emotionally sensitive, empathetic, gentle person. And she takes care of Giles, she makes him meals, she makes sure he's taking care of himself. She obviously cares for the Fishman. She teaches the Fishman ASL. I thought that was a very clever way of working her disability into the film. She feeds the Fishman. She teaches it about a variety of things. She's exposing it to music and dancing and culture. But she's not just like a sweet one-dimensional character. She actually has an incredibly morbid sense of humor. And she's surprisingly impulsive. Like you kind of realize kind of towards the middle of the film that she's like kind of daring and she takes risks a lot. But she's also quite cunning and clever. And there's a couple times in the film where she surprised me, where she kind of does things to like advance the heist essentially. And yeah, I think she's a very smart character, and she's a smart character written by someone who is smart. Um, I really like the fact that the reason she loves the Fishman is because, she's self-aware of how she's viewed as like a disabled woman, as sort of broken. And she likes the fact that Fishman doesn't view her as broken. He just sees her for her. Which I think is a really powerful and kind of unique reason to love someone.
Mm.
And I really like that her muteness like is an advantage for her in this film. Like, nobody notices her because she's just the janitor who can't talk. And she uses ASL to basically build this language between her and the fishman that like someone who can talk would never have been able to. And it's kind of this interesting example of like your disability being a strength if you're smart enough and you can use it well. And she's also a character. We'll talk about this with this idea of the man of the future. Giles and Strickland are both obsessed with being men of the future. We'll define this later. She's not. She's totally customized her life. She's comfortable being a janitor. And, she sort of does what she wants. She's very picky. She likes everything correct. She eats the same number of eggs that are cooked at the same time and temperature every day. She masturbates every day in the morning by an egg timer, and she customizes her life. There's a part kind of early in the film where they're talking about cornflakes being used to sort of repress people's sexuality and not have them masturbate. And there's a very funny scene where she's masturbating in the morning while eating cornflakes. And I think that's the embodiment of her as a character, where she's content with who she is, and she she lives her life how she wants, regardless of sort of the expectations of society. She's also a very interesting fusion of all of kind of the traditional Disney princesses, her arc. And obviously at the end, the fishman gives her gills, heals her, and then she travels with him back to South America. But like, her falling in love with the fishman is a parallel to Belle falling in love with the beast. But in the ways that she mimics other princesses, she sort of shows how they're misogynistic, and she's kind of an evolution. Ariel, the mermaid princess who loses her voice in order to find her true love, and then she gets her voice back and lives on the land. It's actually the opposite. They never like fix Eliza. You know what I mean? She is voiceless, but she has a voice. And it's kind of not a film about fixing her. It's a film about everyone else realizing that she doesn't need to be fixed. She's perfect as she is. Cinderella, the dropping of the shoe, which in her story the prince uses to find her. In this story, her shoe drops off in the canal when she's holding the fishman. He doesn't need to find her. It's not a story where she's she's already there and she loves him. You know what I mean? I like how and I like that she's the pursuer. She is the one who seduces the fishman, not the other way around. She's not the princess waiting in the castle. She is the one that literally saves him from his metaphorical castle, the military base, and brings him home. And I think she's a super strong character, really well acted. I think she's like almost the perfect deconstruction of like the princess archetype in a film that's masterful at deconstructing things. I don't know if you had any things you want to say before we move to Giles.
I guess a question for you before we move on to Giles is, do you view her desire for this fishman as like a commentary on sexual deviancy in terms of like non-heterosexual, heteronormative sort of relationships?
Oh, definitely. She's definitely a metaphor for interracial romance. And in a time that is a segregated America. But I think the film is clever in that it is a romance film in some ways, but a lot of the strongest relationships in the film are not romantic, they're platonic. I would argue that her most powerful relationship in this film, I don't know if you would disagree, is her relationship with Giles, which is totally platonic because she's straight and he's a gay man.
Yeah, no, I think that is probably the strongest relationship presented in the film.
Yeah, so Giles, he's kind of a older gay man, and he's a former illustrator who worked for a pretty fancy marketing firm. And it's kind of implied he was pushed out of the business, not only because they found out he was homosexual, but like the business has changed. They don't need illustrators because it's in the era of photography. And he's Eliza's best friend, and he's also kind of a paternal figure for her. I thought their relationship was excellent. It's kind of cute and funny in the right points, and then it's powerful and emotive in other points. And they have tensions in their relationship that are realistic, and then they resolve them, and it's not drawn out like a lot of worse romances. There's a point where Eliza is very upset with him because he's not initially wanting to help her, free the fishman, and she hits him. and he's shocked and upset, and then they resolve it. And there's another point where, you know, Guile's attempt to be a man of the future is kind of thwarted, and she's initially fairly aloof about his desire to do that, but she accepts that element of himself and she empathetically understands, and they bond on that too. I thought they just had a really powerful romance, and Del Toro didn't attempt to like what is it called, like
Dramatize.
make it, yeah, in a way that like would make it a lesser film. You know, he's an interesting character. He's very emotionally sensitive, he's gentle, he's kind, he's very funny, and he's kind of mischievous and almost like boy-like, you know, in his love of fucking pie, how he and Elisa like tap dancing together and watching these musicals. He's a very fun character, but he's, you know, and he's kind of a funny character in that he's an effeminate older gay man. He's a dandy who always is well dressed. He is obsessed with his toupee and appearing a certain way, and you know, he's very worried about his age and his lack of status, unlike Elisa, who's kind of happy with who she is. Giles is, what I mean by man of the future is the 1960s were a transformative time where America was evolving into what would become the sole superpower on Earth. And some of these characters don't believe in the future, and we'll talk about that in themes. Some of them reject the future. Giles and Strickland are both obsessed with becoming part of that future. Giles wants to overcome everything, and he wants to return to being like a successful marketing guy with money and respect. And it's kind of a transformation of his character to realize that that can't happen and to accept it, because that's the thing that drives him in his life. And you know, he's also a character who initially is very depowered and helpless. He just doesn't believe he has the ability to change things the way that Eliza does. And then he kind of overcomes that, and he helps her, and he transforms as a person, and he helps her transform. Thoughts before we move to my man Dimitri?
Actually, you're skipping a character. You put Zelda in there.
Oh yeah, before Zelda.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. No, I think Giles is. One thing I did like about Giles, and this is something I forgot to mention in the strengths, but specifically for him, is you pointed out that his clothing is very like worn, but also very upper echelon, upper class. So he's a man who like very much at one point dressed himself very nicely when he had the means to do so. So it's a very interesting thing to see him kind of battle with his looking to the future, but also looking at the past. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of indications that Giles is very inarguably the smartest and most educated person in the film. Giles is extremely eloquent. He can quote poetry by memory. He's a very talented artist, multimedia wise. He can reference Greek literature and Greek mythology. He references different points of history. He references like things in American corporate culture
Doesn't
at
he
the
speak
beginning of the
Latin
century.
at one point?
I don't remember that, but it wouldn't surprise me. But he's definitely like, he's the archetype of like almost the misunderstood but brilliant character. And he also serves as really important comedic relief, because this film can be quite gritty and serious. And he's the funny one that lightens the mood, but he's also one of the strongest dramatic tensions in the film. He has I would argue he has the most diverse role actually, and the most complex character besides Strickland in the cast.
Mm. Yeah, I think he definitely serves a very strong point, and he's one of the high points in terms of characterization. I think there's actually a scene, and I'll be brief about this, but there's a scene where he's in the bathroom with the fish man, and he's talking to the fish man, and he's like, I feel like I'm born between two different eras, where I was born too early yet too late as well.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about some themes. It's a very interesting quote.
Yeah.
Zelda, I don't have a lot to say about Zelda. I mean, she just doesn't have enough screen time. She's mainly a plot point, but she's a black woman who's a cleaner and works with Eliza and is basically her best friend. Zelda serves as her translator with people who can't speak ASL. And Zelda's kind of function is she's exposition. She says all the things that the other workers, low-level workers at the military base believe, but Eliza can't say, obviously.
Hmm.
Zelda also is kind of transformed by love in her own way. Her husband sides with Strickland, and she abandons him and backs her white, deaf, gay friends to basically save this fishman who she doesn't particularly like and is afraid of, but she does it for them. So she's another interesting example of love being transformative. There's Dmitri. He is the military scientist who's actually a secret Russian spy. His job is to extract or kill the fishman in order to stop the Americans from using it in the space race. But he's ultimately badly wounded by the Russians who betray him, and then he's tortured and then murdered by Strickland in order to find out where the fishman is. I thought Dimitri was actually the hidden gem. I think there should have been more time on her than Zelda, because I think he's a much more nuanced character. He's a guy who's sort of shaped by his ideological and national political allegiances, but he is himself a gentle, sensitive, intelligent, empathetic character. And he basically, when he realizes that the fishman is sentient, he decides to view it as a living human being. As a scientist, he respects its intellect, and he believes that using it as a weapon is wrong. And he is the one who helps Elisa, Giles, and Zelda's plan to rescue the creature to work. And he's also the one who covers for them after the escape. And he's also the one who observes Elisa's interactions with the fishman, but doesn't report her. So, he's a very interesting character. And I think it's in a movie about the Cold War, having one of your most sympathetic and sort of important protagonists be a Russian spy is a pretty powerful thing. Maybe I'll do Strickland last, but yeah, maybe I'll do the Fishman next. So the Fishman is he's obviously based on the creature from the Black Lagoon, which is one of the oldest horror stories in his design. He's a literal fish out of water in that he survives in the ocean and the rivers, and then he's placed in this military facility. He used to be worshipped and protected in South America by indigenous people as a god before he's stolen by Strickland and brought to America. And the Fishman is a fascinating deconstruction of that horror archetype, where it's not just that he's the love interest, it's that he's framed initially as this hyper strong monster, which he kind of is, but actually his real abilities is that he's a powerful healer. He can regenerate himself, but he can also heal others. Giles is balding. He's sensitive about that. He wears a toupee. The Fishman is able to essentially heal him and allow him to grow hair again. When Giles is injured, he heals Giles. He also heals Eliza, obviously, and brings her back from death, and he gives her gills. So it's kind of an interesting story of he's viewed as a weapon, but he's not. He's actually this powerful healing device. And Strickland is injured during the film when his fingers are ripped off when he's torturing the Fishman. And over time, he attaches the fingers to his hand again, but they become increasingly bloated and swollen. By the end of the film, they're these black sausages. And it's kind of an ironic story of like your prejudices causing you suffering, because Strickland, the Fishman could have healed Strickland and fixed his fingers, but he doesn't realize it because he doesn't attempt to understand it or empathize with it.
Yeah, and it seems to me like it's one of those stories where it truly talks about the transformative ability of both hate and love.
Yes, which is a great segue into Strickland.
Yeah.
I think Strickland may have devalued to some degree other like devolutions of like normal characters who go insane, because like I thought like Leonardo DiCaprio did a great job in Shutter Island, Wild Bill and The Green Mile. But I think Strickland is at the top of just like a completely batshit shit insane character who just unnerves you, and then over time like makes you literally uncomfortable just watching him on screen do things. So Strickland is the protagonist of any other story. He's this white Southerner. He's a military operative. He captures the fishman, and then he decides to dissect it, overruling Dimitri, who wants it to live. And then he goes on this crazy killing torture spree in an attempt to murder the fishman before it escapes. But he is in almost every way the conventional protagonist of every story. He's this tall, handsome, polite, by the book, physically strong, proudly American kind of white guy, and he has an atomic family in the burbs with a blonde conventional wife. He drives around a brand new Cadillac, and he wants to like make it. He wants to rise to the military, serving his country, and live in the city, what he calls the real city. But he's an interesting kind of breakdown of that archetype and why it's problematic. Strickland is incredibly prejudiced. He's a character who is ableist. He's deeply misogynistic. He's an elitist. One of the reasons that the fishman escapes is that he's too much of a pretentious shitbag to interview all the help, even though the help are the ones who allowed the fishman to escape. The reason he has to resort to torture is because he doesn't believe that the help or any of the non-white characters in the story could have rescued it and overcome him in the military. He thinks it has to be some sort of special ops Red Army operation. And he's also a cheater. He wants to basically cheat on his wife with Eliza. The main morality of Strickland, which unravels over time, is that he's a Christian fundamentalist. He's obsessed with sin. He describes this fish monster as inhuman, and it's kind of implied he views racial minorities this way, because in his mind, humans are in the Lord's image, and he can't conceive of the God being anything but someone who looks like him. And he's kind of disgusted by Baltimore itself, which he calls kind of a shithole. Wonder why he thinks it's a shithole in the 1960s, and he wants to go to the real city, which I think is Washington. And there's a story that Strickland tells at least twice. It's the story of Delilah and Samson, which is a biblical story where Samson is basically like he's super strong and he can win against any foe because he has unbelievable strength. And his woman Delilah essentially tricks him into telling her that his power comes from his hair. If his hair is cut, he becomes neutered. And when Delilah cuts his hair and allows his enemies to capture and torture him, Samson prays to God to basically give him his strength one last time. And then he uses his strength to destroy the temple that he's been captured in and kill basically all of his enemies. And that kind of paints not only the way Strickland views himself as this Samson figure, it also paints the way that Strickland views a lot of the characters in the story, that they're these treacherous, cunning, animalistic creatures that will betray him, and that he can only keep in place through just sheer brutality. Strickland is obsessed with being a man of the future like Giles. He wants to be a part of the new golden age of America. He wants to be, the picturesque 1960s man. And he's determined to achieve this by basically any goal. And initially, this is painted as kind of a neutral phenomenon, and then over time, you see how dark it is. But Strickland is ambitious. He's always talking about how he wants a bigger house. He wants to have a better promotion. He's an ass kisser to his superiors. Part of the reason why the fishman escapes is that he's so obsessed with his image of success that he hides its escape from his superiors, which allows them to escape more effectively. He buys the Cadillac in the film because the salesman frames the Cadillac as the car of the future and says any man of the future wants that Cadillac, and he wants that success. He wants that social status. And Strickland's obsession with his self-image, even little stupid things like the number of times you wash your hands in a given time period indicates whether you're a man or not. Like, it is all in service of him attempting to transform himself into the man of the future, which ultimately he fails at, not only because that man doesn't exist, but he's also not the man of the future at all. We talked about how the Fishman becomes more human. Strickland is the opposite. He initially enters the film looking like the archetypal protagonist, and that it's not only his actions but his own deformities make that not apparent. The first one is obviously when he loses two of his fingers and they're reattached. They're swollen and they're ugly, and then over time they darken as he does more evil things. And he eventually bites the fingers off kind of near the climax, which I think is kind of a very clever twist, because normally in these horror films, like if you're injured, it's because the monster has like attacked you in some way and you fought it off. In the case of Strickland, because he is the monster, even in his own story, he is the one who disfigures himself. He bites off his own fingers. It's not the Fishman who does it.
He doesn't even bite them off. He just like straight up rips them off with his hand. Like rips out the stitches and everything.
Yeah. And then, the other thing that makes Strickland deformed is his Cadillac. His Cadillac is badly damaged during the heist to get the Fishman away from the facility. And for Strickland, the Cadillac represents his ability to get to the future. And its damage is psychologically unnerving to him because it shows that he's not the man of the future, that he's damaged. And that's what he's terrified of. And how his self-image is delusional. Strickland is obsessed with the Bible, and he's obsessed with positive thinking. This idea, he's reading self-help books all the time. This idea that if you ignore the darkness of reality and you think delusionally everything's going to go okay, everything will eventually happen. And that's a theme of Strickland. A huge theme of The Shape of Water is voicelessness. People finding a voice who can't normally because they're poor, because they're black, because they're minorities in some fashion, they're gay, they're mute, having a voice. And I think it's very telling that Strickland, his obsession with maintaining those delusions about himself and others, causes him to basically be the character in a film about people finding their voice who hates the voices of others. And he covers up his wife's mouth while she's having sex with him because she gets uncomfortable because his fingers are bleeding on her, and he orders her to be silent in a very rapey way. He says, despite the Fishman biting his fucking fingers off at the beginning of the story, the thing that angers him the most about the Fishman is actually the noises it makes when he strikes it, when it screams with the kettle prod. And then he's sexually aroused by Elisa because she can't speak, and he finds that attractive. This is like a character who doesn't want to hear the voices of others. He wants to live in the future. He wants to be the man of the future, and everything that stops him from achieving that goal, whether it's the Fishman escaping or simply people expressing fear or displeasure around him, he destroys them, or he silences them, or he intimidates them.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a good place to pick up to the themes.
Well, I have a little bit more because I want to talk about his transformation.
Sure.
So Strickland devolves, as we're talking about, and he does it physically, and then he increasingly does it behaviorally. So initially, Strickland is this military man. He's always on time. He's incredibly efficient and precise. And then over time, this doesn't happen. The stress of the Fishman escaping and the sort of infection of his fingers means that he abuses painkillers. He does it subtly at the beginning of the film. At the end, he's just like openly downing them in front of even his victims. He has mental breakdowns. He screams positive affirmations at his own mirror reflection in the bathroom. And then, the man who's the stickler for rules, who demands everyone call everyone else by formal titles. And, he admonishes Dimitri and refuses to speak with him because he won't knock on his door and introduce himself to his secretary instead of, him. By the end of the film, he steals another military man's car. He illegally follows, tortures, and then murders Dimitri by like tearing at his open gun wounds and like dragging him around by his mouth wound. He illegally breaks into people's houses without a warrant or permission. He threatens to kill Zelda and her husband despite them being unarmed civilians. And he doesn't actually know at that point that they're guilty. And then, of course, he attacks Giles from behind and badly injures him. And then he shoots Eliza, who is unarmed, and disabled, and also the Fishman, despite them not posing a threat to him. And then the ultimate example of his complete divulsion is right before the Fishman kills him, he claims the Fishman is God. And that's the ultimate example. He's a Christian fundamentalist who not only releases his own sense of morality, but he literally worships another god right before he dies.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to say he's horrific. Like there are a couple scenes in this film that he's in and he's terrifying. There's when he tortures Dimitri, and there's when he shows up at the pier. But I think the most creepy, uncomfortable thing, it's the worst form of sexual harassment I've ever seen on film. He sort of creates this pretense to bring Eliza into his office, and he starts sort of asking her a lot of fucked up things, like, if you're mute, will you make sounds during sex? And like, I don't mind the scars and not speaking. Like, I think it makes you moldable. And Brian and I were like wincing. It was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever seen. And that's kind of the energy that Michael Shannon brings. Is he's just this obviously unstable, unhinged character who will do literally anything to anyone at any point in time, including in his office in the military base.
Yeah, it is truly unhinged. I will say, like, to watch some of the scenes with him, it's just a hard watch. It's not easy. But moving on to, is that everything you got, or do you have something else before
we can go to
move on?
themes? The themes will be shorter. This is like the Breakfast Club.
Okay, yeah. So the themes, we're gonna start with the themes you have. So go ahead and take it away.
So water is a huge part of this film, and water represents love. It represents platonic love and romantic love. So the shape of water, why it's called the shape of water. Water is shapeless. It takes any form. And that's the point of the film, that love takes any form, that love can't be constrained, that it is whatever it needs to be to connect people who love each other. And love is able to transcend all boundaries. Zelda loves and ultimately chooses Eliza over her own family, despite her being white, because love overcomes race. Giles loves Eliza, despite the fact that he's gay. Eliza overcomes literal interspecies problems in order to love the Fishman. And Dimitri, his sense of platonic love means that he betrays not only his ideology, but his country in order to do what he thinks is correct. Love is the ultimate transformative. And love is shapeless because there is an infinite number of reasons to find other people beautiful, platonically or romantically. And, love is transformative, like we're talking about. Like, love shows Elisa that she's not a broken person. Love is what causes Giles to realize he can't be a man of the future and he should stop trying because it's futile. And, Dimitri, Eliza, the Fishman, Giles, Zelda, they're all different. They're all minorities. They're all outsiders. Love brings them all together, and it heals them. It makes them not alone, and it makes them better people. And water is also a sign not only of love, but what love brings in this film, which is rebirth and change. Water is used to clean the facility. The bath in Eliza's apartment, that's not only where she masturbates and revives the Fishman, it's also where they have all their sex scenes. The water droplets on the train in the rain, where it literally moves Eliza around and allows her to achieve her goals and rescue the Fishman. The ocean itself that Eliza and the Fishman go into and frees them from America. And the Fishman himself, his heartbeat sounds like the sea breaking against the beach. And he's the ultimate catalyst of all the love in the film. And water also represents sex. And this film is super sex positive. And I thought, we were talking about this, like, there's a lot of nudity in this film, but it doesn't feel voyeuristic or like exploitative.
Or gratuitous at all.
Yeah, it's all necessary for the plot. And, the women are not like ogled at or objectified. Like, when Eliza's naked, it's powerful. You know what I mean? She's kind of an empowered woman. But yeah, the masturbation scenes, the sex scenes, they're all water coded because that's the representation of love. And obviously, not all forms of love have to involve sex, but many do. And this is sort of in contrast to the way the future is sort of framed. I don't know if you had any thoughts before we move to the future.
No, keep going for sure.
So, one of the big there's three big color schemes in this film, and these are the last three themes. The future is coded yellow. The people who talk about the future, they wear yellow outfits. The places that are supposed to be the engines of the future, they're yellow coded. But the future is discussed overtly by a lot of the characters, and it's also a constant theme in the background television and visual media. This is the 1960s. The Americans in this film are certain that what the future brings is American prosperity, growth, and power. They believe they're going to win the space race and take out the Russians and land on the moon. They believe anyone who's a white male can achieve the American dream. Strickland in particular. This is the beginning of corporate franchising, and they think that will make American business explode. And this is the beginning of photos being used in marketing, which will revolutionize advertising from a political, military, business perspective. Like, we are in the golden age. There's nothing but unlimited potential. But the future is also a very dark place. It's bland, it's cold, and it's unhappy. Compared to Eliza and Giles' homes, which are, cozy and they're green themed and they feel lived in, his suburban house is a fucking nightmare. It's bland, it's personalityless, and Strickland clearly hates it. That's why he tries to cheat on his wife with Eliza. That's why he's a workaholic who spends all his time in the office. The military base itself, where all of the white men in charge are yellow coated, it's also a uncomfortable, stressful place where they don't like each other. Strickland, his obsession with using positive thinking is also a sign that, like, being a man of the future isn't helping him in his life. And but this future is also, it's conformist. You have to shape yourself around the future rather than shaping yourself around love in order to survive it, or you will be destroyed. There's a part where Strickland is talking to his superior, a general, and he describes Strickland's firing and therefore his loss of being part of the future as being unmade. And that's kind of the theme. The future's coming whether you like it or not, and you will either be powerful and rise with it like America, or you'll be disposed of. You can see this in the way that the marketing firm talks to Giles and the military to Strickland. There's no loyalty regardless of how long they've worked there. They're assets, and they will be eliminated if they don't do their jobs. Strickland needs to buy the Cadillac, the suburban house. He needs that atomic family, the blonde wife, to be accepted. The future isn't coming for people who don't shape themselves around the future and sacrifice everything for that future. And the other thing about the future is that its golden promise ignores all the inner suffering in America. And this is shown both overtly in the characters themselves. The pie shop worker, he has to fake his accent to keep his job. Giles can't find work, not only because the photo shift in advertising in the future, his illustrations don't matter, but also he's gay. The racism of the era means that Zelda and the other African Americans in this film won't be a part of that future. The general, when he's reprimanding Strickland for letting the fishman escape, Strickland brings up Christian values, which is something he cares about. And the general has this quote where he's like, the military doesn't care about decency. If we cared about it, we wouldn't sell it as an export. And that's the world of the future. It's a place where a lot of people are going to be left behind. Most of them are fucked. Those who aren't have to sacrifice everything to be a part of it. And if they fuck up in any way, they'll be disposed of. This is also shown in the background, particularly in the televisions in Eliza and Giles' house. You can see that, there's a constant decay and poverty theme in the film, that everything's rotting that's not at the military base. You can see it in the emptiness of the movie theater that Giles and Eliza live under. The future is not a place where people dream. You can see it in the segregation of society in this time period. In the pie shop, Black people are not allowed to sit at the counters. The military base, almost all of the cleaners and workers are Black, and almost all of the supervisors, they're all white. The racism and the homophobia and the prejudices drenching all the dialogue from the white characters. And, there's also the political components. We see civil rights protests being ended by the police setting feral dogs on the protesters and spraying them with fire hoses on Giles television. And we know when they talk about capturing the Fishman in South America that they found him accidentally. They were attempting to illegally build oil oil wells in those natives' properties. And we know from history that this is the beginning of us taking over South America through imperialism and killing all their leaders and forcing them into our image.
Yeah.
So it's the future is a dark, controlling, and exclusionary place. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts before we move to green?
I mean, like, it seems like all these colors, at least to me, intermingle with one another, right? Because each color represents, I think, a different part of that experience, right? Like, the black and white sequences are clearly you're sort of looking at the past, but you have your yellows that look to the future. Now, I guess you'll get into this with green, but do you view it as something that's looking at the present of the scenario?
I view the green as representing all the things that American mainstream society ignores that were necessary for America to be prosperous in the first place. Their green represents all the minorities, including the protagonists of the film, who aren't a part of that future, but actually were essential in building it. The water is green, love is green, regardless of whether it's straight or gay or interspecies. And love is arguably the thing that makes the film work and made America work. A lot of the protagonists, Giles and Elisa, they wear green clothing. Their apartments are green themed. That's a theme in the story. A lot of the minorities wear green, or their environments are green. You know, the minorities that like built this country and run everything. The unskilled labor is green. The pies at the pie shop are green. Elisa's mop bucket she uses to clean the military base is green, and the water in it. The military base soap is green. You know, it's the working man built the future. All the women's areas are green. The changing facility at the military base, Eliza's bathroom, which I interpret both as meaning, you know, again, love is kind of an underseen component of America, but also that women are. The Jello in the advertising that Giles makes for the marketing company, it's green. The ad, which is about the atomic family, was made by a single gay man. You know, the Fishman is green, who's a literal alien that doesn't come from America, but he's essential for the American military's plot to win the space race. And finally, Strickland, a lot of him is green. His Cadillac is green. His favorite snack, which is candy, is green. And you know, it's telling that Strickland is ashamed of both. He hides the candy for most of the story because he thinks it makes him look not like a man. And he corrects anyone who calls his car green and says it's teal. But that shows even the most conventional, white, powerful Americans, they rely on these sort of hidden figures underlying American society to do anything. Strickland literally can't find the Fishman or go to work if it's not for his green Cadillac.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last thing, which is shorter, is fantasy, black and white. And I think fantasy is also tied to the past at the beginning of the film, but it becomes the future at the end of the film. So Elisa and Giles, they escape from the past or the present by old school black and white television. It's a lot of musicals, television, movies. They have good taste. It slaps. And, you know, that escapism allows them to be happy in an incredibly ugly society. And those black and white things from the past, they play constantly throughout the film. They literally live above a huge movie theater. You know, those fantasies are what keep a lot of these minorities alive and happy and able to keep going. You know, it's a way to escape the cold, prejudiced reality and find something different and beautiful. But at the end, there's a really powerful shift where initially it's the past because the present and the future are hostile to these minorities. But ultimately, the way that Elisa and the Fishman kind of culminate their love is this black and white dream sequence that's kind of like a Broadway production where they're dancing on this big Broadway stage with stars all over the ceilings and the UFO set piece in the middle. And I think that shows like it's sort of like a trick. You think black and white represents the past. And actually, Brian and I were talking about this. Like, why is a guy like Del Toro making the past? Why is he fetishizing it? But I think what it really is black and white isn't the past. It's just the ability to imagine. And they imagine with the past because it's the only thing they have. But ultimately, I mean, Eliza and the Fishman, their ultimate fantasy is not from the past. It's a fishman and a mute woman dancing in a fucking UFO star themed Broadway play.
It is one of the weird, like, it's the weirdest sequence in the film because it seems almost out of left field, but it really doesn't, because you get that build up with all the television and all the shit in black and white beforehand. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's kind of like those old black and white television shows they're for the mainstream, and this is their personal fantasy. They don't give a shit whether or not it feels weird to you or me. It's about them. And that's the power of fantasy. Even if it's created by the upper class, ultimately we all have imaginations. Ultimately we all make our own fantasies if we're brave enough to.
Yeah. And I guess do you have more to add on that as well?
No, I'm good. Those are my 4 themes.
So I guess for me, like, we'll end it with one question here, and there's one question I have in specific, and it's, do you view, like, we talked about sexuality with this movie a lot, but I'll just end it on it because I'm curious about your thoughts. Every time we've had a different sort of representation of sex in the film, we've had a homosexual man, we've had your heterosexual sort of couplings in it, but you've also had the sexual orientation with Lisa and the reptile, or the fishman, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, like, do you think the film is really a commentary on, is it a racial component to you in terms of interracial dating, or do you view it as a commentary about how love is equal regardless of its expression with your partner?
Well, I think it's the latter philosophically, but in terms of the history of the symbolism, it's definitely about race.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the first horror monsters, King Kong, the creature from the Black Lagoon,
they were all racially coded. Yeah.
They're black people. They're big-lipped, massive, voracious sexually monsters that are fetishizing and chasing after white women.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's very deliberate on the part of a Mexican director who's been very open across his career about being discriminated against and feeling like he's an outsider. Of, you know, you've made all these racial minorities monsters in your films that literally white men hunt down and murder. I'm going to make a film where the white woman not only gets with the fishman at the end of the story, but like she seeks him out. You know what I mean? I think that's I think Guillermo del Toro is really, really good at those deconstructions. I think you can also see this in his other better work. And I think making the fishman the love interest is a very loud commentary about race and the way it's portrayed in media.
Yeah, and I'm definitely looking forward to checking out more of these. That was just the main question I had throughout watching this film. But saving the last part for, or the best for last in terms of this last part, we always do. Rating wise,
you rate it first.
I rate it first. Okay, geez, putting the ball in my court. So I truly think it's a 10 out of 10. Like, you know, we've had now 2 of them on the show, which I genuinely didn't think I would give it that. At a midpoint in the film, I was like, yeah, it's a 9.5. But, like, some of the romance scenes, some of the cinematography, it just fucking, and the acting, it just blew me out of the fucking water. No pun intended.
Yeah, when they get back to the apartment and she and the fishman go on their honeymoon, it goes up a notch. And then I think Strickland's descent into madness is also like A+.
Yeah. So definitely a 10 out of 10 film. Highly recommend it. In terms of like my 10 out of 10s, I don't think I'd put it higher than Eternal Sunshine. I think Eternal Sunshine is still that like S+ tier. But
where is it on Mount Rushmore? What number is it?
On the Mount Rushmore? Because I think truly Eternal Sunshine is like my 1. It might be like my 2 or my 3. I'd have to like, You know what? I just actually watched a 10 out of 10, and I think it is my 3 right now. Because the other one I'm thinking of right now is Princess Mononoke is my 2.
Yeah, that's a great film too.
Yeah. So, well, what about you? Where do you rank it?
Oh, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. I think it's a fascinating and great film. I would put it above Eternal Sunshine, and I'd also put it above Get Out.
You would.
But
You would put it above Eternal Sunshine.
I would. I think the only two films I've seen that are better than this is Ex Machina is my favorite film I've ever seen. That's
Yeah.
a great film. And then I think Shutter Island slightly edges it out, but I do have a bias.
Yeah. That's fair. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I have. Do you have any final thoughts you want to wrap up before we call it quits here?
No.
Fair enough. um, yeah, so I guess that's where we'll end it. Thank you guys so much for listening. It's been a long one, but hopefully a good one for everyone listening on, and we'll talk to you hopefully again here soon. Take care.
If you're getting tired of us having love themed things, because we have a randomizer, it's not deliberately having like 3 films in a row about love. I promise you that the next film will not be about love. It will be about carnage and death and American imperialism. It'll be great. It'll be radical. We'll never talk about love during the entirety of that film.
Very, very different sort of themes going on. So, anyway, y'all take care and have a good rest of your day. Bye.